The night I watched my husband pour me a glass of wine and smile. I should have known. A man doesn't smile like that at the woman he loves. He smiles like that at the woman he's about to bury. And by sunrise, I would be exactly where he wanted me. 6 feet under our own garden. My name is Claire Whitaker, and the man you're about to hear me describe was once the love of my life. He was the man who held my hand at my father's funeral. The man who promised me forever in front of 300 witnesses. The man who told me, every single night for 9 years, that he could not imagine a world without me in it. What I did not know, as he poured that glass of wine on the evening of October the 17th, was that he had already imagined that world. He had planned it. He had measured the depth of the soil behind the rose bushes. He had bought the shovel 2 weeks earlier, in cash, from a hardware store 40 miles outside of town. And the smile on his face, the one I had loved for almost a decade, was not love at all. It was relief. The kind of relief a man wears when he believes the end of his problem is finally within reach. Before we go any further into this story, before we deeper into the truth of what happened in that house, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what I am about to tell you, the things this man did, the way he was caught, and the moment he realized I was still alive, is the kind of story that does not leave you when the video ends. It stays. Like the taste of antifreeze in a glass of red wine. It stays. To understand how a marriage becomes a grave, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the night I met Daniel Whitaker. It was a Tuesday in April in a small wine bar in downtown Charleston, and I was 27 years old. I had just been made the youngest partner in my late father's architecture firm. My father, Howard Pierce, had died 6 months earlier of what the doctors called a sudden cardiac event, and I was still raw from it. I was still walking through rooms half expecting to see him. Daniel was sitting 2 stools down at the bar, alone, reading a paperback book about cathedrals. He looked up at me, and the first thing he ever said to me was, "Your father designed the chapel on Meeting Street, didn't he?" I should have asked him, even then, how he knew. But I didn't, because he smiled and he had a kind face, and he was the first person in 6 months who had said my father's name without lowering his voice. I cried at that bar in front of a man I had known for 4 minutes. And Daniel did not look away. We were married 14 months later. 300 guests on a coastal estate I had designed myself. My mother walked me down the aisle in my father's place, and when Daniel lifted my veil, he was crying so hard he could barely speak his vows. He said, "Claire, you are the only home I have ever wanted." And I believed him. Of course I believed him. Why would I not? We built a life together that, from the outside, looked like a magazine spread. I expanded the firm. He gave up his marketing career to manage the household and what he called our shared future. We bought a 4-bedroom Craftsman on a half-acre lot, with a garden in the back that he insisted on landscaping himself. He planted English roses along the fence. He built a stone path that wound from the patio to the back wall. And every spring, for 9 springs, he would bring me coffee in the garden on the morning of our anniversary, and he would tell me that this house, this garden, was the only place on earth he ever wanted to grow old. The first time I felt something was wrong, it was so small I almost did not notice it. It was a Thursday in February. I came home early from a site visit because a client had cancelled, and I found Daniel on the phone in the laundry room with the door closed. He was speaking softly, the way you speak to someone you do not want overheard, and when he heard the front door open, he hung up so fast the phone clattered on the dryer. He came out smiling. He kissed me on the forehead. He said it was his mother calling about a doctor's appointment. But his mother had been dead for 4 years. I told myself I had misheard him. I told myself he had said his aunt, his sister, anyone. I told myself a great many things over the next 3 months, as the small wrongnesses began to accumulate. A receipt for a hotel in Savannah on a weekend he had told me he was hunting with his college friends. A new cologne I had never bought him. A phone that, for the first time in our marriage, lived face down on every surface in the house. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a good wife trusts. And then, on a warm night in May, I found the envelope. It was in the back of his sock drawer, under a layer of folded handkerchiefs, and I only found it because I was looking for a cufflink. The envelope was from a life insurance company I had never heard of, addressed to Daniel, dated 3 months earlier. Inside was a policy, $2 million, on me, with him listed as the sole beneficiary. I sat down on the edge of our bed, and I read that policy 6 times. I read my own name, my own date of birth, my own social security number, and a signature at the bottom of the application that was supposed to be mine, but was not. The handwriting was close. It was very close. But the C in Claire had the wrong slant, and the W in Whitaker was missing the small loop I always put at the end. He had forged it. My husband had forged my signature on a $2 million policy on my own life, and he had done it in February. The same February he had been on the phone behind the laundry room door. I put the envelope back exactly where I had found it. I folded the handkerchiefs the way he had folded them. I closed the drawer, and then I walked downstairs, and I poured myself a glass of water, and my hands did not shake, because I think some part of me had already known, for a long time, that this was coming. I did not confront him. That was the first decision I made, and it may have been the decision that saved my life. Instead, I called the only person in the world I trusted more than I had once trusted Daniel. My oldest friend, Maya Bellamy. Maya had been a federal prosecutor for 11 years before she left to teach law at the College of Charleston. She had seen things. She knew things. I met her at a coffee shop 2 miles from my office the next morning, and I slid the envelope across the table to her without a word. She read the policy. She read the signature. She closed the envelope, and then she looked at me with a kind of stillness I had never seen on her face before, and she said, "Claire, listen to me very carefully. If you confront him, you will be dead within the month. Do not change a thing. Do not look at him differently. Do not flinch when he touches you. We are going to build a case, and we are going to do it before he finishes the one he is building on you." What Maya did next changed everything. She introduced me to a private investigator named Robert Ellis, a retired detective who had spent 20 years working insurance, fraud cases in Atlanta. Robert was a quiet, careful man in his early 60s who took notes in pencil and never wrote anything down on a phone. He looked at the policy. He looked at the signature. And then he asked me 3 questions that I will never forget. He asked me when my father had died. He asked me how my father had died. And he asked me whether Daniel had been in my life before my father died or after. I told him Daniel and I had met 6 months after my father's funeral. Robert wrote that down in pencil. He looked up at me, and he said, "Mrs. Whitaker, I need you to bring me everything you have on your father's death. Every document. Every medical record, every photograph from the last year of his life. I think we are looking at something much larger than an insurance policy." I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life that I would not wish on my worst enemy. By day, I gathered records. My father's death certificate, his autopsy report, which had been brief, because no one had requested a full toxicology screen at the time. His medical records from the year before he died, which showed a man who had been in excellent health, no heart conditions, no cholesterol issues, nothing. I gathered our joint bank statements, our tax returns, the deed to our house, the paperwork on every account Daniel had access to. By night, I went home, and I kissed my husband, and I cooked dinner with him, and I let him pour me wine, and I drank it. because to refuse the wine would have told him everything. The hardest thing I have ever done in my life was lie next to Daniel Whitaker in the bed we had shared for 9 years, and pretend I did not know what he was. There were nights when he would roll over in his sleep and put his arm across my chest, and I would lie there in the dark listening to him breathe, and I would think, this is the arm that is going to bury me. This is the hand that is going to throw the dirt. Robert came back to me on a Friday afternoon, in the third week with a folder so thick he had to hold it with both hands. He set it down on Maya's kitchen table and he opened it slowly. And he said, Mrs. Whitaker, before I show you what is in this folder, I need you to sit down. I need you to drink some water. And I need you to understand that nothing you are about to see is your fault. Then he laid it out page by page. The first page was a photograph of Daniel, taken 11 years ago, at a charity event in Atlanta. He was 32 years old in the photograph. He was standing next to a woman named Eleanor Hastings, the widow of a real estate developer who had died of a sudden cardiac event in 2014, 8 months after marrying Daniel. Eleanor had inherited $2.4 million. The second page was a photograph of Daniel, taken 9 years ago, in Phoenix, Arizona. He was standing next to a woman named Margaret Doyle, a divorced restaurateur who had died in a single-car accident in 2016, 6 months after marrying Daniel. Margaret had left him $1.8 million. The third page was a photograph of Daniel, taken 7 years ago, in Portland, Oregon. He was standing next to a woman named Patricia Ahn, a software executive who had drowned in her own bathtub in 2018, 5 months after marrying Daniel. Patricia had left him $3.1 million. 3 women, 3 states, 3 deaths. And then, 6 months after Patricia's funeral, Daniel had walked into a wine bar in Charleston, South Carolina, and he had sat down 2 stools away from a young architect whose father had just died. I do not remember crying. I remember the sound of my own breathing, and the sound of the refrigerator humming, and the sound of Maya's voice, somewhere very far away, saying my name. I remember Robert putting a glass of water in front of me and waiting. I remember Maya finally saying, Claire, your father did not have a heart attack. Your father was murdered. He was murdered so that you would inherit the firm, and Daniel would inherit you. And when Daniel was finished with you, you were going to die the same way Patricia died, or the way Eleanor died, or the way Margaret died, and he was going to walk out of this town with everything you have ever built, and he was going to do it again, to someone else, in another city, and he would have Claire. If you had not found that envelope, he would have. There are not 3 women in this folder. There are 3 women we found. There may be more. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed next to my husband and I watched the ceiling fan turn. And I thought about my father. I thought about the last time I had seen him alive, 2 days before he died, when he had taken me to lunch at a little Italian place near his office. And he had said to me, Claire, promise me something. Promise me you will not marry a man who does not love your work as much as he loves you. And I had laughed at him. I had told him I was not even dating anyone. And 6 months later, I had been standing in a wine bar telling a stranger about my father's chapel. I lay there in the dark and I understood finally that my entire marriage had been a transaction. Every kiss, every anniversary, every morning he had brought me coffee in the garden. In the very garden where, I would later learn, he intended to bury me. All of it, transaction. The next morning I went to Robert and Maya, and I told them I wanted to do it. I wanted to wear the wire. I wanted to give them what they needed to put him away for the rest of his life, and for the lives of the 3 women he had already taken, and for my father. Robert told me it was dangerous. Maya told me it was dangerous. I told them I knew. We brought in the FBI through a contact of Maya's, a special agent named Diane Foster, who had worked on a series of marriage fraud cases in the Southeast. Agent Foster listened to everything. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. And she said, "Mrs. Whitaker, I have been doing this for 19 years, and I have never had a victim who was still alive when she came to us. I want you to understand that what we are about to do has never been done with a target like your husband, because targets like your husband do not leave living witnesses. If we do this, we have to do it perfectly. And you have to do exactly what I tell you. When I tell you, even when every part of you is screaming to run." For 3 weeks I wore a wire. I wore it under the necklace Daniel had given me on our 5th anniversary, a gold pendant in the shape of a small house. Our house, the one with the garden. I wore it while I made him breakfast. I wore it while he kissed me goodbye in the mornings. I wore it while he sat across from me at dinner and told me about a trip he wanted us to take in the fall, just the two of us, to a little cabin he had found in the mountains of North Carolina. I let him talk about the cabin. I let him show me pictures. I let him book it. And every word he said went into a federal evidence locker 40 miles away. The recordings caught him talking, on the phone in the garage, to a man Agent Foster's team identified as a former associate from his Portland days. They caught him discussing the cabin and the date of the trip, and a phrase that the prosecutors would later play in court 11 separate times. The phrase was, "After the weekend, we will not have to worry about her anymore." He said it on a Tuesday in September. Agent Foster played it for me that night in a hotel room in West Ashley. And I listened to my husband, the man who had cried at our wedding, plan the weekend of my death in the same voice he used to order takeout. The plan, as the FBI pieced it together, was elegant in its cruelty. Daniel would drive me to the cabin on a Friday evening. He would pour me wine that had been laced with the same compound that had killed Patricia Ann in Portland, a substance that, in the right dose, would mimic a cardiac event almost perfectly. I would die in my sleep beside him sometime in the early hours of Saturday morning. He would wait until late Saturday afternoon to call emergency services from the cabin's landline, sobbing, saying he had woken up and found me cold. The cabin was 3 hours from the nearest hospital. By the time anyone reached us, the substance would have metabolized to the point where only a very specific, very targeted test would find it. And no medical examiner in rural North Carolina was going to run that test on a grieving widower of a 36-year-old architect with no known health issues, but a family history, as Daniel had been carefully telling our neighbors for the last 6 months, of sudden cardiac death. He had even gotten me to mention it once at a dinner party. He had brought up my father, gently, sadly, and I had said yes. It had been a heart attack, completely unexpected. 3 witnesses had heard me say it. He had been laying the groundwork for my death in casual conversation for half a year. We were not going to let him get to the cabin. Agent Foster's team planned the takedown for the Friday morning of the trip, while Daniel was at the bank making what he believed would be his last withdrawal as my husband. But on the Thursday night before the operation, something happened that none of us had planned for. Daniel came home early. He came home 4 hours early, and he came home with a bottle of red wine I had never seen before, and he walked into the kitchen where I was standing at the counter, and he set the bottle down and he smiled at me. He said, "Sweetheart, I could not wait. I wanted to celebrate the trip tonight. Let me pour you a glass." I felt the wire taped against my ribs. I felt the small pendant against my collarbone. I felt the kitchen tile through my bare feet. And I felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, the absolute certainty that my husband knew. Something in his eyes had changed. Something in the way he was holding the bottle. I do not know what tipped him off. I have spent years wondering. Maybe he found a receipt. Maybe he saw Robert's car on our street. Maybe he just felt it. The way a predator feels when the prey is no longer afraid. I will never know. But I knew, standing there in our kitchen, that if I drank the wine he was about to pour, I would not see Friday morning. The cabin was no longer the plan. The plan was now. He poured the glass. He held it out to me. And he smiled the smile I described at the very beginning of this story. The smile a man does not give to the woman he loves. The smile a man gives to the woman he is about to bury. I took the glass. I lifted it to my lips. And then I let it slip out of my hand, and I let it shatter on the floor between us. And I said, Daniel, I am so sorry. My hands have been shaking all day. I have been so anxious about the trip. He looked at the broken glass. He looked at me. And for 1 second, 1 full second, the smile was gone. And what was underneath it was the face of a man I had never seen before. And I understood in that second that this was the face the other 3 women had seen at the end. Then he smiled again. He said, of course, sweetheart. No problem at all. Let me get you another glass. And he turned to reach for the bottle. And in the moment his back was turned, I pressed the small panic button Agent Foster had given me, hidden inside the pendant on my chest, and the front door of our home came off its hinges 6 seconds later. What I learned over the months that followed, in courtrooms and interview rooms and through every document the federal prosecutors entered into evidence, was that Daniel Whitaker was not his real name. He had been born Daniel Mercer in a small town in Indiana, and he had legally changed his name 3 times across 3 states, leaving behind 3 dead wives, 3 insurance payouts, and a paper trail so carefully constructed that the FBI later told me he might have been the most successful marriage fraud killer in the modern history of the southeastern United States. The compound found in the bottle of wine he had brought home that Thursday night matched the compound found in Patricia Ann's bathwater in 2018, which the Portland Medical Examiner reopened the case to test for, and which a new autopsy confirmed. My father's body was exhumed under federal warrant the following spring, and a full toxicology screen found traces of the same compound in his hair follicles. Daniel had killed my father in 2015 at a business dinner the 2 of them had attended, a dinner I had set up because Daniel had told me he wanted to introduce himself to my dad. Daniel had introduced himself, all right. He had introduced himself, and he had poisoned the only family I had left. And then he had walked into a wine bar 6 months later and had read a book about cathedrals until I sat down. He pleaded not guilty. He went to trial. He was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 3 counts of insurance fraud, and 2 counts of forgery. He is currently serving 4 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole at a federal facility in Colorado. I have not seen his face since the day the verdict was read, when he turned in the courtroom and looked at me across the rows, and I held his eyes for as long as he held mine, and I did not look away. I do not know what he was trying to say with that look. I do not care. Some doors, once you close them, you do not open again. The garden at our old house was excavated 3 weeks after his arrest, on the recommendation of a forensic anthropologist who had reviewed his pattern. They did not find a grave that had been dug for me. What they found, 3 feet down beneath the English roses he had planted along the fence, was a small wooden box. Inside the box were 9 items. A wedding ring belonging to Eleanor Hastings, a driver's license belonging to Margaret Doyle, a locket belonging to Patricia, a photograph of my father, the one that had gone missing from his wallet the night of the business dinner, and 5 other items that the FBI has not been able to identify, belonging to 5 other women whose names we may never know. The garden was not my grave. The garden was his trophy case, and I had been gardening over it for 9 years. I sold the house. I burned the photographs of our wedding, all of them, in the fire pit of Maya's backyard one cold night in February, and I did not cry while I burned them, because by then I had cried enough for 10 lifetimes. I rebuilt my firm. I took my mother's maiden name, and on the 2nd anniversary of the night, I dropped the wine glass on my kitchen floor. I drove out to my father's grave in the cemetery on Meeting Street, the one beside the chapel he had designed, And I sat down in the grass beside his headstone, and I told him everything. I told him I was sorry I had not listened to him at that little Italian place. I told him I had finished what Daniel had started, in the only way I could. And I told him that I was alive, that I was still here, that the man who had taken him from me was sitting in a concrete cell 2,000 miles away, and would be sitting there until the day he died, and that the last face he had seen as a free man was mine. The wind moved through the cemetery oaks, and I sat there for a long time, and somewhere in that quiet I understood the only thing left that mattered. The man who had married me had counted on one thing above all others. He had counted on my love being a weakness. He had counted on the fact that a woman who loves the way I loved would never look at the man in her bed and see what he truly was. He was right about the love. He was wrong about the weakness. Because love, the kind that is real, the kind that is built and not performed, does not make you blind. It makes you certain. And when I became certain, on the night I read that policy in our bedroom, he had already lost. He just did not know it yet. He smiled at me one last time across our kitchen, holding a glass of wine, and he thought he was burying me. He was burying himself.